Okay, so we are going to pick back up from where the audio cut off in the last video. And the example we were on reads that we are going to take the quantity negative 2x to the third power and raise the entire quantity to the fifth power. Okay. Now, the negative 2 part, when you raise that to the fifth power, what happens there is that you have negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, which, as it turns out, is equal to negative 32. All right? And one rule that I want to be sure we're aware of here is that anytime you raise a negative number to an odd exponent, you're going to get a negative number as the result. Okay? So a negative number raised to an odd exponent is going to equal a negative. However, if you raise a negative number to an even exponent, you'll get the opposite result. You'll get a positive. And it's just because of that old rule, the negative times a negative is going to equal to a positive. Okay, so I'm just going to put here even is going to turn into a positive. Okay. With that out of the way now, the x to the third, when I raise that to the fifth, remember using the power rule, 3 times 5 is going to give me x to the 15th, and that is the answer that I want for that example. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on and talk about another very similar example. Right here, we have negative 4 x to the negative fifth power z to the negative second power. And of course we surround the entire thing in parentheses there when we raise it all to the third power. Okay. Alright, I'm sorry, that should be the negative third power. So when we raise that to the negative third power, we're going to do the same basic thing. And I'm just going to break this down in a couple of steps here. The negative 4 is going to get raised to the negative third power. X to the negative fifth, we're going to use that same concept we used on the last few examples when multiplying the exponents using that power rule. So this negative 5 gets multiplied by this outside negative 3 exponent. And that's going to give me x to the positive 15, since a negative times a negative is a positive. Same thing with z. I'm going to multiply its exponent of negative 2 by the exponent on the outside of the parentheses, negative 3, to get positive 6. Okay, the negative 4 raised to the negative 3 is the last part that I have to break down. And I'm just going to do a little side work here to kind of show you how we deal with that part of it. Negative 4 raised to the negative third power, if we remember, when you have a negative exponent, you basically just put the entire part, the negative 4 in this case, in the bottom underneath the 1. Keep its exponent, and just keep that exponent and make that exponent now a positive 3. Alright, the question becomes, what is negative 4 to the positive third power? Remember, if it's a negative number raised to an odd exponent, which it is here, it'll result in a negative. So the negative 4 raised to the third power is going to be 64. 4 times 4 would be 16. 16 times 4 again would be 64. So really, what happens here is that negative 4 to the negative third power equals negative 1 over 64. So going back to our original problem where we just had to worry about breaking down this part of it here, now we have negative 1 over 64, x to the 15th, z to the 6th. Of course, Course Compass may want you to go ahead and put this 1 over 64, multiply that out with the other part here that is not a fraction. And in this situation here, since you've got a 1 on top, it would just get multiplied by the x to the 15th, z to the 6th, and this part will stay the same. The 64 on bottom will end up here as its denominator, like so. So we'll get a negative x to the 15th, z to the 6th, over 64. That may be what Course Compass is looking for that particular question. Okay. If of course, if they're not looking for this answer here, then I would certainly go with the one in the prior step. Either one of those should get the job done for you on Course Compass. Okay. All right. one more problem we need to worry about right here, and that is 3x to the 5th y to the negative 8th power, and that's all in parentheses, over z to the negative 2nd power, and that entire fraction is going to be raised to the 4th power. Okay, so in this situation here, what you have to remember is that when you have an entire fraction raised to an exponent like this, what that results in is just the top part, 3x to the 5th, y to the negative 8th, being raised to that exponent 4, over that bottom part, z to the negative 2 power, being raised to that outside exponent 4. Okay, so the exponent applies to the numerator, the top part, and it also applies to the bottom part, the denominator here. Okay, now it's a matter of just breaking down everything inside the parentheses and applying that exponent to everything in parentheses. So what this turns into is we take the number, the first factor here, 3, and we raise that to this outside exponent, 3 to the 4th power, which of course is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. Oh, let's see, 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 again would be 27, and times 3 one last time would be 81. Likewise, x to the 5th raised to the 4th power, remember that power rule, we multiply the exponents, x to the 20th power. Y to the negative 8th raised to the 4th right here, we'll get y to the negative 32 power like so. Same thing on bottom, we'll multiply our exponents together using the power rule, and it's going to be z to the negative 8th power. One last thing we need to do here on this problem, just to satisfy course compass, if we see those directions to say write your answer without negative exponents again, what we're going to do is basically move the factors with negative exponents to either the top or bottom, whichever one they're not already on. So for example here, the y to the negative 32 is going to get moved to the bottom, x to the 20th of course will stay where it is, and the z to the negative 8 will get moved to the top, where its exponent will become positive. And of course, when we move that y to the 32nd down to the denominator, its exponent will be negative, or positive rather. And that's probably the answer that course compass is looking for right there, especially if they say specifically not to write the answer with any negative exponents. All right, and we'll go ahead then and pick up on scientific notation and the factoring and combining like terms in the next video screencast.